is Jim Wake again. The following comments pertain to item 2 on this videotape and were made by me in December 1986. I'm aboard a Canadian Pacific Airlines flight approaching Whitehorse. Lake Labarge can be seen in the background. This lake was made famous by the poet Robert Service in his poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. This is the Lewis River Valley below Whitehorse. This river is one of the main headwaters of the mighty Yukon River. This is the oil refinery built by the Americans during the Second World War. The large gray building was the Bank of Commerce, while across the corner was the Whitehorse Inn Hotel. Looking down Main Street, Whitehorse, the White Pass and Yukon Route station was on Front Street, facing the end of Main Street. This is the steamer Kino returning to Whitehorse after pushing a barge to Hootalinqa for the steamer Casca, which was already pushing one barge. From this point, where the Teslin River joins the Lewis, the Casca can push the two barges safely. We made a stop at the river community of Carmax to put off some freight and to take on a load of wood, or to wood up, as it was said by the locals at that time. Using the boat's steam-powered capstan to position the boat better for loading the wood. Repositioning the gangplanks. The wood was spruce, cut in 4-foot lengths. Some of the passengers, mostly tourists, they like to go ashore whenever possible. Glimpses of Captain Campbell, a veteran river pilot. There he goes up to the wheelhouse. A canvas sheet spread in front of the wheel, protected against cold river breezes. The Anglican Mission Church can be seen as we leave Carmax. We are approaching the Five Finger Rapids, which were navigable by the paddle wheel steamers through the finger opening on the extreme right only. On the return trip, it was often necessary to grapple for a cable attached both above and below, and wrap it around the boat's capstan to help pull the steamer through the swift water. About a half an hour's run farther down, we came to the Rink Rapids, a treacherous bit of the river. Reached Fort Selkirk, the Anglican Mission, Taylor and Drury's trading post, the Hudson's Bay Company in the distance, the RCMP barracks with the red roof, Corporal G.I. Cameron standing at the top of the ramp, closer view of the Hudson's Bay Company, the RCMP again, Taylor and Drury, telegraph office, the Mission House, and the Anglican Mission Church. We've reached Stewart City at the mouth of the Stewart River. Hudson's Bay Company residence and the Hudson's Bay store. A roadhouse or inn, a beer parlor, and the dock area. It was rather empty, due partly to the fact I was traveling on the first boat of the 1945 season. There are some passengers killing time playing horseshoes. This was St. Mary's Hospital at Dawson City, looking down from Suicide Point. There's a view of Dawson City at that time from the same point. The buildings were of log or frame structure. Klondike River comes out between those two bluffs in the background. Klondike, of course, became famous as a result of the 1898 gold rush. This is Front Street of Dawson City, looking towards the Midnight Dome and the big slide. This is the RCMP office building, the Yukon subdivision side. The Imperial Order, Daughters of the Empire, erected this monument in memory of the ill-fated Fort McPherson to Dawson Patrol of 1911, all the members of which lost their lives. This is the detachment side of the same office building you saw a few moments ago. Special Constable Johnny Dines, an old-timer, is on the steps. View of Dawson City from the old AC Trail. AC meaning Alaska Commercial. You can see the clear waters of the Klondike River mixing with the silt-laden Yukon. A fish wheel operating in the Yukon River to catch salmon during the annual run. There's a panoramic view from the steamer Klondike as it approaches Eagle, Alaska on the Yukon River, a short distance from the international boundary, looking upstream. This is the steamer Klondike moving closer to shore at Eagle, a customs port of entry. The pilot is positioning the boat beside its barge to facilitate unloading. Here they are unloading an old car, vintage about 1927, belonging to the U.S. Customs officer Jack Hilliard. Such a car was thought to be good for driving on some of the old dirt roads around Eagle during the officer's summer assignment at this place. Because of its design, the steamer Klondike could carry more freight on board than any of the other steamboats then operating on the Yukon River in Canada. This sign, erected for tourist purposes, indicates we are crossing the Arctic Circle. This is the fireman stoking the boiler, which is located on the lower deck. A view of one of the two drivers located in the stern of the boat. This is a view of one of the drivers on the outside. We are just idling at this point. We are approaching Fort Yukon, Alaska, and the Northern Commercial Company and Carter's Trading Post are the largest buildings in this scene. The steamer has reached the end of its run, so all the freight must be unloaded. This post office also served the village of Old Crow in the Yukon Territory, to which point I was going. Consequently, all mail leaving Old Crow had to bear U.S. postage. Nurse Grace Crossan, viewing the monument erected at Fort Yukon in memory of the discoverers, explorers, and pioneers of the Yukon and Alaska. Residents gathered along the Fort Yukon riverfront to watch a float plane land and take off. A quick glimpse of the nurses' retreat a short distance behind the village. A view of the village of Fort Yukon from the air. About 400 people lived there at that time. The Hudson Stuck Memorial Hospital can be seen in the background of this shot. The mission house is in the foreground. Here's another view of the mission house. This was a rather large building. It housed not only the resident missionary priest and his family, but also had a chapel, schoolroom, boarding facilities, and accommodation for visitors. Now we will have a closer view of the 35-bed hospital. That is the TB solarium on the left. The hospital was named after an Alaskan pioneer and was operated by the American Episcopal Church. Dr. Disasway and her nursing staff in front of the hospital. The doctor is handing the medical bag to Mary Crease, the head nurse, who was going on village sick calls that morning. The doctor consulting her engineer, Al Rowe. They're admiring the new tractor which had just been brought in for use by the mission. It's going to be of great benefit to haul wood from the bush, supplies from the dock, and help with the gardening. This is a close-up of Dr. Lulu M. Disasway, who had spent some 17 years in the mission field in China before coming to Fort Yukon. Bertha Mason, who served at the Grenfell Mission, was a commercial pilot and also had served in the U.S. Army. Mary Crease, the head nurse. Ann Weitzel, now Ann Waite. These are some of the girls who worked in the hospital as ward aides. They were also in the church choir. Dr. Dissosway in one of her few lighter moments. This scene and those which follow were taken when I was on transfer from Old Crow in 1947. There had been some changes in nursing staff since my previous visit, and here you see the new nurses, Nancy Wilson and Gladys Ross. Here are Miss Mason, myself, Reverend Wilford Files, and his son Willie. Dr. Dissosway saying goodbye. Bertha Mason came to say goodbye also. Constable Jim Wake, myself. Willie Files playing with his dog Rusty. When Willie grew up, he returned to Fort Yukon as a school teacher. He is presently at Fort Yukon as a school official. The Reverend Wilford Files, his wife Ann, and myself in front of their home, the Episcopal Church Mission House in Fort Yukon. RCMP members were required to wear red serge while on transfer at that time. Hello. We are about to start item 3 on this videotape. These comments were made in December 1986. Fort Yukon is near the confluence of the Porcupine and the Yukon Rivers. Banks of the lower Porcupine River being undercut by the high stage of water. I'm aboard the Moose, which is pushing a large load of supplies to Old Crow, some 300 miles upstream. Approaching the ramparts, a 100-mile section of the river where its banks are canyon-like. At the entrance to the ramparts, we pass this formation known as the Howling Dog. Scene taken at midnight in the rampart on June 21, 1945. The riffle, or shallow swift water, at New Rampart House near the international boundary between Alaska and the Yukon. New Rampart House, a former Hudson's Bay post, was abandoned at the time I was there. Unloading the barge at our destination, Old Crow. The Moose struck a rock in midstream on its next trip and was lost. The Northern Commercial Company trading post at Old Crow, formerly known as Jackson Brothers, it had been operated by the surviving brother, Jim Jackson, until he sold out to the company. The supplies consisted of a great variety of clothing, canned and dried foods, trapping and fishing equipment, and supplies, as well as kerosene and gasoline, which came in wooden boxes, 2 5-gallon cans to a box. A wheeled aircraft brought in a load of fresh goods for trader Harry Healy. The aircraft landed on a river bar, which had been leveled with shovels by the RCMP and marked with white cloth for flags. View of Old Crow Village from the river with the Old Crow Mountains in the background. The dwellings were mostly of log construction with sod roofs. The red-roofed RCMP detachment building. The arrival of RCMP inspecting officers, Superintendent D.J. Martin, then OCG Division, and Inspector H.H. Cronkite, then OC Yukon Subdivision. myself, and Jack Frost, a former member of the RCMP, bringing up their effects. A view of the new greenhouse, the dog yard, the cabin I lived in, a small building I spent a lot of time in, the food cache, and the dog food cache. And finally, the ice house. Here are Corporal E.A. George Kirk and Mrs. Kirk opening up the greenhouse. They are about to harvest the first tomatoes to grow and ripen at Old Crow, which is some 75 miles or so inside the Arctic Circle. They were able to grow enough of these tomatoes and a few other vegetables, for example carrots and peas, to last sparingly for a few weeks. These were a delightful treat when most of our food was either dried or came in tin cans. Here I am in a cranky old canoe, visiting a fish net we had set where the Indians usually put their nets. They were away on the annual muskrat hunt at this particular time. There was a good catch that day. Here it is, quite a variety. Some of the fish would be fed green to the dogs. The choicest and excess fish would be preserved by being put in the deep freeze, a pit dug into the permafrost. This is Boise, one of the corporal's dogs. The RCMP dogs in their summer location along the riverfront, the dog yard being a quagmire in summer due to the melting permafrost. Here I'm changing the water. The water was usually changed several times a day, and as you see, the buckets were mounted on posts to help keep the water clean. You see Prince, my wheel dog, jumping up, and Towser closest to the camera. There was lots of running water. Just had to go and fetch it. I'm using cans made from 5-gallon gasoline cans. The dogs get snow in the wintertime. Cooking dog food in the morning. This was mainly a cereal mash with some tallow. We often added table scraps, caribou bones, fish, cod liver oil, or perhaps a rabbit or two. We fed the dogs once a day. Around supper time, the food buckets, like the water buckets, were made from gasoline cans. We had to remove the food buckets as soon as the dogs had finished. Otherwise, they would have ripped the buckets apart with their teeth in order to get at the morsels in the corners. RCMP Commissioner S.T. Wood arrived for an inspection by RCMP aircraft CFMPG, a Grumman Goose. There is the commissioner with his back to the camera on the right. From Old Crow, commissioner and party headed for a rendezvous with the RCMP schooner St. Roch, which was in the Arctic at that time. Our wind charger tower here is an easterly view from the tower. The corrugated buildings you see belong to two of the three local traders. Joe Nitro's on the right foreground, the NC companies in the distance. The Old Crow trading post operated by Harry Healy. An old-timer of that country. Observe the roof made from gasoline cans. The Northern Commercial Company trading post. It also had a gas can roof. Former owner of the post, Jim Jackson, is in the center. Claude Tidd, first manager for the company, on the right. Mr. Steele, successor to Mr. Tidd, on the left. Mr. Tidd's wife had become ill, otherwise his stay would not have been so brief. The boat that eventually replaced the Moose. This boat was so powerful it cut the time from Fort Yukon in half, but it couldn't carry enough fuel on board for the trip, hence valuable space on the barge had to be used. This new boat was lost in the fall of 1947 when it caught fire a short distance from Old Crow and had to be cut adrift from the barge. This is Sam Olson, a trapper, prospector, and sheet metal worker. Albert Schaefer, a trapper. Frank Foster, a nearly blind, well-educated man who spent much of his life in the north as a trader. David Lord, a trapper. Note the lobstick or tree with limbs cut off in a certain way. Such lobsticks were used in the early days as landmarks. Hello again. You are about to see item 4 on this videotape. This commentary was made in December 1986. Indian families returning to Old Crow in June after the annual muskrat hunt on Old Crow Flat. Those with larger boats would usually bring others who had only canvas-covered scows. Notice all the people aboard, the dogs, the variety of equipment, including the 2 homemade ratting canoes on the roof of the launch. There's another family will land a little way downstream. Chief Peter Moses coming in, Neil McDonald, Charlie Linklater, and others. Long and narrow, good for operating in swift water. My next door neighbor was Joseph Kikovichik, commonly called Big Joe because of his stature. Here he is making a fish net. Big Joe was a lay reader at the local Anglican church. There had been 3 Joes at Old Crow just before my arrival. The Big Joe already mentioned here, Holy Joe, the recently departed Anglican missionary, and Little Joe, the diminutive native trader, Joe Nitro. Here are 2 Indians with a lucky catch of salmon, as they were not plentiful. The man on the left is carrying a choice king salmon, while the other is carrying 2 poorer quality fish called dog salmon. This is the king salmon. Here is Mary Lazarus carrying her baby with the support of a beautifully beaded baby strap for which these Indian women were famous. Mary was the wife of Lazarus Peter Charlie, son of Peter Charlie, so named to be distinguished from the son of Peter's brother John. Such naming was a custom at Old Crow. Here is Charlie Peter Charlie, brother of Lazarus, painting window frames of his log cabin. This is Rowena Moses scraping a moose skin to make it pliable, one of the processes in tanning a hide the native way. Notice the log schoolhouse in the background, one-room structure that was not used during my 2-year stay at Old Crow because there was no teacher. Old Caroline Moses picking up driftwood for her stove. The old people tried to be independent as long as they could. This is Balaam Judy delivering a load of wood for the NC Company trader. Eliza Steamboat sitting in her cabin doorway enjoying a smoke. Children of the community whose parents did not leave Old Crow to participate in the muskrat hunt. Here are Martha Kendi, Joanne Judley, and others who had been upstream picking berries. Martha's husband John brought them home. Swallows on the radio antenna wire above the church steeple. These birds were very shy. They seemed to always fly away whenever the camera was pointed at them. They fed on mosquitoes, which were very plentiful. Local residents having what was called a potlatch to celebrate Dominion Day 1946. There's Big Joe saying grace. Moosehead soup. Notice that the men sit down first. This is Chief Peter Moses, Order of the British Empire. Some parishioners starting to renovate the parish hall by removing the sod roof. Others dressing split poles for use in the new roof. Even little Norman doing his part. Some of them didn't like the evil eye and were putting dust in my camera lens. There's Robert Bruce cutting a corner log. Here are some of the men carrying one of the heavy roof logs. Chief Peter Moses in the center and Neil MacDonald on his left. Neil was the son of Archdeacon MacDonald, the famous translator. There he is. That's Neil at the top. They're quite proficient in the way they handle work like this. There's Robert Bruce again. There they're putting those split logs or split poles on the roof. They sink the poles with moss, covered them with flattened cardboard cartons, then put rolled roofing material on top. Here is a group of the workers one evening, about 10 o'clock, having a lunch put on by the Women's Auxiliary. Don't be surprised that the sun still being up at 10 o'clock. Must realize that they have 24 hours daylight there in the summertime. Elias Quad Latchy standing up. See a closer view of him. Amos Porcupine sitting on his left. Julius Kendi and Alfred Peter Charlie on his right. Here are the Reverend Julius Kendi and his wife, Bartha, a fine couple. Close-up of Julius. A glimpse of the beautiful stole made with beads sewn to white caribou skin, made by Barsis for Julius. The church altar hangings, stained glass window, said to have been shipped in many years before, in syrup, to prevent breakage. These altar hangings were made with beads sewn to linen, which was in turn sewn to white caribou skin. This was beads sewed directly to moose skins. This was the lectern hanging. Another view of the swallows. We were glad to see them around because they helped control the scourge of mosquitoes. There's Big Joe and the Reverend Julius. This, unfortunately for Julius, was the funeral of his grandson, his only grandson. Some caribou swimming in the Old Crow River. At this point, my camera magazine jammed, and yet I had all kinds of these caribou around me. Here is Big Myra using a hatchet on some caribou ribs. Later you will see her holding a porcupine. It was a surprise to me when she held it up. These are some of the members of the Women's Auxiliary butchering and hanging up to dry my share of meat from a caribou hunt I participated in. This work was done as a way of saying thank you to me for nursing them during a terrible outbreak of influenza. Everyone in the village but myself was stricken. I made rounds morning and night, and when needed, I gave them sulfa tablets if needed, dependent on their temperature and immediate temperature history. I remember being amazed at some of the temperatures recorded, many reaching to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and some even up to 104, and wondering if they could survive. They all did. In this scene, Annie Quadlachi is skinning the front quarter of a caribou. Liza Steamboat, gonna light up her pipe. Her husband was Steamboat Robert. He got that nickname Steamboat because he was the first of the Old Crow natives to travel to the Arctic Ocean and see a steamboat many years before, when the whalers had a base on Herschel Island. When the work was finished, the corporal's wife, Mrs. E.A. Kirk, provided some pilot biscuits, hardtack to use, butter, jam, and tea. You saw the women saying thank you in their native tongue, Sitchi, Sitchi. This is old Margaret Black Fox being helped to launch her canoe so that she can visit her fishnet in front of the village. We think she was the oldest resident at that time. Now she's going to whack it over the head to kill it. I don't say how many fish did you catch today, it's how many fish did you kill. Here's Margaret with her catch for that day. She takes it home, fillets it, hangs it to dry. The fat will be used right away. Now observe a quick look at her 3-compartment hovel. Now the summer is coming to an end, and the John Newcon family are packing up to go home. This is John Newcon, the old man of the family. They live some 250 miles farther upstream at a village called Whitestone. They'll hunt and fish all the way home, getting there just before freeze-up. People of the village waving goodbye to them. Greetings, this is Jim Wake again. The following comments, which relate to item 5 on this videotape, were made in December 1986. A winter sunrise, looking from King Edward Ridge across terrain we had covered by dog team toward the northern slope of the Old Crow Mountains. This scene was taken from near the same point, but looking in a northerly direction over Old Crow Flats where we were heading. Elias Quadlatchy, breaking trail for his dogs after a very heavy fall of snow. I had to hire him as guide and trail assistant. Scene of trail Elias had made with his team and toboggan. We would take turns breaking trail. This is my team. Teams following the frozen Old Crow River, looking for a promising way to get up the steep bank to the Crow Flats. This is a temporary bridge of spruce boughs cut and thrown across a flooding creek to make it safe for the dogs, drivers, and the loaded toboggan. We are about to arrive at Peterson's winter camp on the east side of Old Crow Flats. Peterson was a white trapper married to an Indian woman. They had 4 children. These scenes were intended to show what usually happened when we called on a trapper and his family, but I didn't expect them to line up. Normally, the dogs were bedded down first, but in this case, the toboggan was unloaded to give a glimpse of the load. 2 kinds of snowshoes, a rifle, bedroll, food box, small sheet metal stove, caribou skin for a mattress, and dry salmon for the dogs. This is one of the Peterson girls visiting her muskrat trap set inside a feeding stool which has been shaped in the underside of the ice by the muskrats. Scene of a live muskrat being removed through a hole in the ice made with an ice chisel. Muskrat teeth are razor sharp. The care need to be taken when dispatching the animal. Here is Elias with 2 trappers who had flown to Old Crow Flats from the Northwest Territory, and a glimpse of some of their muskrat pelts. This is an Indian dog and her pups. I moved in closer with the camera, but you can see that she objected. This is the February mail plane. It originated in Fairbanks, Alaska, but tried to fly from Fort Yukon, where it picked up the mail, to Old Crow and back to Fort Yukon the same day. This was barely possible because of the short days, there being only a few hours daylight. The weather was usually severe, minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, making it necessary for the pilot to drain the oil from the motor and take it inside the detachment office to keep it warm until he was ready to depart. Albert Lord, just returning from hospital. My cabin was cozy in winter. Here I am with the 2 pups Corporal Kirk was raising. The next shot after this is very brief, taken December 21, 1946 at noon. This is my team. We're hauling newly felled logs from the bush. These logs were needed to repair our ice house. It was a tough pull going uphill because the logs were green and consequently much heavier than dry logs would have been. We used only wood for fuel, and it was a frequent chore when we were not on patrol to haul firewood from the bush about 1.5 miles downriver from the village. Here we are on a return trip to the bush. The dogs never like going on a second trip on the same day. Consequently, they aren't running as eagerly as they might have been. Now you see some native men returning to the village. Notice this toboggan with the heart decorations on it. These men had been hunting in what were known locally as the South Mountains, about 20 miles to the south of the village. Here's my team following. Notice that the lead dog has a standing iron decoration on his collar. Here are some men sawing a log on the village's only street. The log is exceptional by reason of the great diameter of the log, when at that time it was hard to find a tree with a diameter greater than 8 inches. Here we see the villagers coming out of church on Easter Sunday, 1947. You can see Julius Kendi, the minister, shaking hands with his parishioners. Notice the type of shake, once up and once down. You will see most of the residents, as very few missed going to church when they were in the village. Now you see Chief Peter Moses. Behind him in the plaid jacket is Johnny Moses. In the church, men sat on one side, women and children on the other. There's John Kendi waving to us, Charlie Peter Charlie, and Alfred Peter Charlie, his brother. Moses Tija and Robert Bruce. There's Barsis Kendi shaking hands with her husband Julius. There's little Mara, the chief's wife, and their grandchild. Finally, you see Julius and Big Joe apparently checking the count. Old Caroline going down to visit someone at the other end of the village. A young mother with her baby. Note the fancy bonnet, an alternative to the beaded strap shown earlier. A glimpse of the country east of the Porcupine River but south of the tributary Bell River, near the Arctic Circle. Here I'm breaking some frozen buns to thaw by our noon fire. My guide and trail assistant for this particular trip was Johnny Moses. We stopped to visit this Indian meat camp comprising some 5 or more families. It was located between the Porcupine and Eagle Rivers, some distance south of the Bell River. From this camp, the men would go out to hunt caribou nearly every day. This is Albert Abel cutting wood outside of his tent. Inside is his wife, Ellen, roasting a caribou head beside the portable sheet metal stove. This is their daughter, Maria. A few of the hunters stopping for a warm-up and tea. Spruce boughs are thrown down near the fire so the men's snow boots will not get wet from melting snow. The man with the cup is myself. Here are some men roasting caribou legs to burn the hair off. They cracked the bones and ate the raw marrow with relish. Charlie Abel and his brother Albert can be seen extracting and eating the marrow. This is Albert. I tried it, but found it too fatty to enjoy. Dog teams coming down a steep riverbank, the driver riding the brake all the way. The camera had to be pointed up, therefore the riverbank seems much flatter than it really was. It was very steep. Here is some open water, an ever possible hazard when traveling on river ice, especially in a storm or in poor light. Observe the frost on the back of the driver, indicating the temperature was severe, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder. These are some posed shots to show how we often traveled, running behind the dogs on a good trail. Approaching Johnson's Creek Indian Village, winter home of some Indian families based on Old Crow. The object in the foreground was merely a snow-covered bush. Sawing wood in extremely cold weather. Charlie Peter Charlie chopping. It was minus 50 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and the lens was sticking, speeding the action. Observe the caribou skin boots, woven rabbit skin pants, and cuffs to the parka of Charlie's daughter sewn up so she wouldn't freeze her hands. This is the little girl's great-grandmother, Margaret Blackfox, who you saw earlier visiting her fish net. I asked her if I could take a moving picture of her, and she says, I have to chop some wood. So she did, and now she's carrying it into her cabin. This was one of her two sons, John Charlie. We climbed through a steep path to this high ridge to make traveling easier. This view looks easterly toward the Mackenzie Mountains. We seem to be above everything but this one mountain when we looked westerly towards Alaska, some 50 miles away. Traveling above the tree line. We were not equipped to camp away from trees, so always depended upon reaching a treed area when it was time to pitch camp. This was one of our camps where dry wood was available for the fire. Some dog yard scenes at Old Crow. First signs of spring breakup on the Porcupine River in front of the village. Garbage from the past winter thrown by Indians over the bank. Much of this would be washed away by floodwaters. When the water gets high enough, the ice breaks loose and starts to flow. The ice will jam, causing the water to rise still further. The jam will break loose and the ice will flow free again, only to jam again and again somewhere. Large pans gradually break up. Caribou are often caught on the ice and lose their lives. High water and ice creates a strange noise that can be heard for miles. Jams raise the water level until the village is about to be flooded. During the two spring breakups that I viewed, the water and ice never overflowed the banks at Old Crow, but came perilously close to doing so. Some of this ice will be left on shore when the river flows free. Clean, clear ice will be used for drinking water while it lasts. The breakup usually takes place in May. Some of this ice could be as thick as 8 feet. Notice how some of it crumbles easily because it's been what they call candled. Claude Tidd, the NC Company manager, was also a movie enthusiast. One Sunday, I decided to dress up and with his help get these pictures. Hannah Nitro, the wife of Trader Joe Nitro, was out for a walk with her children, so we decided to get her into the action also. Observe the baby strap. Change of aperture for close-up unfortunately washed out much of the color. A view of breakup ice flowing in the Porcupine River at the Big Bend near the mouth of the Old Crow River, which is still frozen. Here I'm climbing on some huge cakes of ice left behind in a slough above the village when a jam burst, to show the comparative size of the cakes. Men working a hand-operated capstan to pull the boats into the river. The large boat with the plywood sides was initially purchased by the NC Company to replace the Moose, which had been lost. This boat proved unsatisfactory and was replaced. Observe the cradle and the log rollers underneath. This was the Marion of Dawson, the first boat to be launched in the spring of 1946. This gray wooden boat with canvas sides, which could be rolled up in good weather, was the RCMP boat. It was the last to be launched that year in order that it could be rechinked and painted before launching. Boats were usually placed on log cradles and were moved by putting log rollers underneath and pulling with the long rope from the capstan that had been threaded through a pulley attached to a dead man in the river. Here I'm finishing painting the boat. Hello again. This is Jim Wake, the photographer. The comments which follow relate to item 6 on this videotape and were made in December 1986. This is the riverfront of Old Crow Village. You can see a float plane arriving. It was operated by Northern Airways of Carcross in the southern Yukon. Trapper Peterson could not get to his winter camp on Old Crow Flats by boat because of unusually low water in the Old Crow River and its tributaries due to lack of rain. He, one of the few white men based on Old Crow, considered it was cheaper to pay half the cost of bringing a plane 800 miles from Carcross and fly his family, dogs, and outfit rather than stay in the village for the winter. Here you see the NC Company barge placed in such a way it could be used as a temporary loading dock. A glimpse of the village from the air, view of some lakes near Peterson's winter camp. some of Peterson's belongings left on the lake shore where the plane landed. Some more of the many lakes on Old Crow Flats, the eastern slopes of the Old Crow Mountains. The Indian Affairs Department agreed to pay the other half of the cost of hiring this plane in order to send us some sorely needed medicine and to take a load of children to residential school. This is a village from the south. This is the group of children that went away to school on that plane. There's Johnny Moses waving. He had sent 2. Unfortunately, they both died of meningitis the following year. Some of the children went to the residential school in Dawson. Others went to the Indian residential school in Carcross. Would stay there until they were 18 years of age. This small paddle wheel boat and barge were stranded because of low water in the Porcupine River during July 1946, about 40 miles below Old Crow. The operators left this much larger barge below New Rampart House because it drew too much water. Some of the freight was brought to the village by small boat. The remainder was brought up to the village late in August by this outfit. This barge could carry 65 tons. It was only loaded with 30 tons at this time. This boat had twin motors, twin props. Now the people are unloading it. The young men of the village went on strike for more pay, so the older men and some of the women and girls went to work unloading. Quite a mixture of freight, as you will see. Cases of gasoline in the foreground. There goes 50 of sugar or rice on Mary Paul Ben's shoulder. There's Paul Porcupine, Johnny Moses. Notice the steep bank. Not only tough carrying the goods up to the top of the hill, then they had to carry it right along the bank to Joe Netro's corrugated steel warehouse. The owner of the boat told me they handed out chocolate bars and comic books to children in the various communities they visited. Now you see Neil MacDonald and Julius Kendi handing out the gifts. The RCMP building in the background. Here they are getting ready to unload this Caterpillar tractor, which was brought in for the Northern Commercial Company, primarily for use in hauling firewood from the bush. However, it was also used for other chores, such as putting the boats in the water in the springtime and hauling them out again in the fall. Now there was something wrong with one of the propellers or drive shafts on this boat, so they wanted to pull it out and have a look, see what they could find. This was John Charlie going by to visit his fish net downstream. While they were doing this work, I was standing beside Peter Charlie, who commented, "That's a damn strong dog, isn't it?" The man on the left at the front of this barge was the owner of the barge and boat. Next to him was a tourist, Mr. Sweet from Seattle. The young man folding the blanket was Jack Haven, a fellow tourist. Our supplies had not arrived, so the corporal sent me along as far as Fort Yukon, where I was to hire a boat to take our supplies to Old Crow if they could be found by radio contact at various points along the Yukon River. At this time, I had no thought of the possibility that I would be frozen in on the return trip some 100 miles from home and have to walk through part of these ramparts, which extend from a few miles above the international boundary at New Rampart House to below Old Rampart House, which is in Alaska some 40 miles downstream from the boundary. Trying to lasso a duck. This area looks like a place where we camped on the way home. Notice the flag giving wind direction as we travel through this swift water. We have reached Old Rampart House, and here is an Indian family standing near the grave marker of the Reverend Vincent Sims, one of the first pioneer Anglican missionaries to serve in this area. He died there in 1885. It was said that he died of some simple illness from which he could have recovered had he been able to receive medical attention. This is a community from a high point of land. By strange coincidence, these Indians, seen in the Hudson's Bay Company graveyard, happened to be the same family with which I was able to store the RCMP supplies when we were subsequently frozen in at Old Rampart House. Here is Paul Ben operating his boat on the return trip. A lot had happened in the short while after leaving the larger boat and barge at Fort Yukon. Now we see a passing group of Indians prepared for cold weather and heading for Fort Yukon. Sights like this were not uncommon on the Porcupine River. Our supplies were located by radio contact at Circle City, Alaska on the Yukon River. We went upstream to get them, but then had a race against time as winter was settling in earlier than usual. I'm pumping the barge because it had started to leak badly. Our outdoor kitchen can be seen nearby. An aircraft flew over, but we had no contact and heard no more of it. One of the beautiful sunset scenes observed before we were forced by ice in the river to pull the boat and barge out of the water and store our supplies. We then walked home. Hello, it's Jim Wake again. This time I'm giving a commentary in December 1986 for item 7 on this videotape. A winter sunrise on the Old Crow Flat. I recall this scene being taken close to noon. It being February, the sun didn't rise very high, hence the sunrise effect lasted longer. Scene of our camp of the night before. We didn't break camp until late that morning in order that I could get the sunrise and following scenes when the sun was right. Constable Wake breaking trail on snowshoes. Scene of dog shadows showing texture of the snow. I had noticed these shadows in February 1946 and was determined to capture them on film the following year. One would think such a picture could be taken any sunny winter's day, but that was not the way I found conditions. This was Fred Johnson, who traveled with me as trail assistant on this trip, and this was our camp on Schaefer Lake at minus 50 degrees below Fahrenheit. Here Fred is getting some snow crystals to melt for water. Here are our team traveling on a creek bottom, winding mostly through willows and alders, showing concentration of wind-blown snow and heavy hoarfrost. Trappers use such creeks for setting traps for mink. The colors in these particular scenes are about as natural as I remember them. Looking southeast from King Edward Ridge across a broad valley to the northeastern slope of Old Crow Mountains. The Richardson Mountains at the Northwest Territories Yukon boundary, some 80 or 90 miles to the east, can be seen in the distance, while the Old Crow River winds in the valley below. Corporal Kirk taking a picture of 3 thermometers the day after we had a reading of 78 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, the coldest at Old Crow that year, which was on or about February 5th, 1947. We borrowed 2 of the thermometers from neighbors in order to show the comparative readings in this shot. A view of the village from the river at 70 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. At that temperature and below, a fog enveloped the community only. Starting on patrol to the south with 2 Indian trail companions, Moses Teja and Paul Ben Cassie. I was standing on the back of my toboggan while taking this picture. We stopped for a break in a mountain valley. The small cloud in the distance signified strong winds in the pass. We had met John and Martha Kendi on their way back to the village. We had mail for them, and needless to say, they were happy to receive it. From left to right, you see Martha, John, Paul Ben, and Moses. Whitey, one of my dogs, had a permanent tick in his eye. He blinked like this all the time. He was having a noon fire, a time to have a snack, maybe some soup from the night before, or some canned sardines, pot of tea, some buns or biscuits. Looks like I'm having the sardines. This scene is not well exposed because some snow was blowing down on us from the mountain pass ahead. Here we are starting the last long climb up the steep pass. By the time we arrived here, the storm had blown off temporarily. Continuing our climb through the mountain pass. A long-ranging view to the north from near the top of the pass. Riding the brake going down a hill on the south side of the pass. Dog teams following a trail south of the pass. A wide view looking west to the mountains near the Alaska-Yukon boundary, taken from a high ridge. I believe it was on this ridge, on an earlier occasion, that I helped a group of near-starving Indians hunt all day for caribou, the temperature hovering around 65 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. These views meet our eye when we arrive at another Indian meat camp. These meat camp scenes record just normal activities observed by the camera immediately after our arrival, even before undertaking the customary task of tying up our dogs. Robert Bruce chopping wood. Moses Teja had just hooked in the tent. Ellen Bruce cracking caribou bones. At first she didn't want me to take her picture for fear she would never stop cracking bones. However, she relented and let me get this shot. Here are 4 teams traveling on a frozen slough. Such scenes where the sun casts long shadows always intrigue me. This is the police team coming down a steep creek bank. As we were intending to follow our old trail on the return trip, I chose this site for a demonstration of how well the team could waltz a loaded toboggan up the steep creek bank. We were on patrol from Old Crow to Black River Valley in March 1947, and we are now approaching the camp of Harold Ostrud on the Black River, on the Canadian side of the Alaska-Yukon boundary. Harold and Mrs. Ostrud greet us at the front door, and young Harold Jr. comes out to see us as well. This is young Harold with his wooden axe his dad had carved for him, wearing his spring parka made of canvas with fox trim. I asked his mother if he could wear his caribou parka, and she obliged. Unfortunately, change of aperture wiped out his lovely rosy cheeks. The dogs are having a slippery time on the river ice because a strong gale blew in after our arrival at Ostrich Camp and blew the snow off this section of the Black River where we were trying to follow our outward trail. As you see, dogs don't follow a trail by sight so much as by scent or feel. However, we directed them to the trail by using the old terms gee and haw. Now we are leaving the Black River Valley and heading up to the Bluefish Lakes, which are nestled in the mountains you see in the background. This scene looks eastward towards the mountains which give rise to the main headwaters of the Black River. While this scene looks back across and down the Black River Valley where we had been. We had not been able to follow our outward trail all the way along the river because much of it had overflowed in the time interval, thus making it too treacherous for travel by dog team. The wheel dog is having a real tough time there. Now we have reached the Bluefish Lakes, and the dogs are having a rest after a very strenuous morning. Water from the Bluefish Lakes flows both north to the Porcupine and south to the Black River, a major tributary of the Porcupine. Here are the teams coming. I had gone ahead to get these pictures. Here's my team: Sandy, Whitey, Towser, Blackie, King, and Prince the wheel dog. Note the gun and snowshoes on my toboggan. This is Johnny Moses and his team. I am wearing canvas snow boots, heavy wool serge trousers, moose-skin mitts, Grenfell cloth parka with fox trim, leather cap lined with rabbit fur. I'm having a fast run downhill, riding the brake all the way. Do you recognize this creek bank? Well, this is where I intended to show how easy it was for the team to pull the toboggan up such obstacles. Well, watch what happened. The front dogs promptly sat down, while the remainder tried in vain without their help. The front dogs were out of my view, and I didn't realize what had happened. Here I am struggling to try and put on a good show, while Johnny Moses was laughing so much I often wondered how he'd managed to get such good pictures. Later, I had to get up and give them a hand, and we were soon on our way. A few days later, we reached this last high ridge between us and Old Crow in the far distance, which was a day's journey yet ahead, so we decided to camp in these trees for the night. That was sunset scene on a nearby hill. And then the moon setting on the mountain that last night of my patrol. The black and white film which follows is item 8 on this videotape. The scenes were taken at various times during my posting to Old Crow, 1945 to 1947. These comments were made by me in December 1986. This is a poor glimpse of what is believed to have been Fort Yukon, Alaska. This was Johnson Creek Indian Village on the Porcupine River, a long way upstream from Old Crow, perhaps 175 miles, more or less. Some of the children at Old Crow with caribou meat and possibly some fish hanging up to dry on the racks behind. The NC Company boat, the Marion of Dawson, arriving at Old Crow. Paul Ben hauling logs from the river by dog team. No easy task, as you can see. It even requires getting wet. Notice the dog twisted in his harness. That will be straightened out before they start to pull. Miss Cadzo handling the team, which is pulling a log down the street on a makeshift roller. Alfred Peter Charlie lending a hand to guide the log along the street. Some beaver in the Bell River. I had an opportunity to shoot an Alaskan brown bear on the Bell River. We were en route to set out a cache of food for winter trips at Lapierre House. Observe the size of this fellow's teeth, his claws, and his paws. A few Indian families arriving at Old Crow from their winter home upstream soon after the ice had gone out. Fellow struggling with two dogs trying to take them up the bank and tie them up. Another one is old Balaam with his shovel and his pipe. Some mothers and children overlooking the river above the steep bank. Trader Harry Healy chopping wood. He was caught in a blizzard while on a prospecting trip a year or so after my departure and lost his life. This is Neil MacDonald and Corporal Kirk loading the police boat for a trip to Fort Yukon. Corporal Kirk again. Neil MacDonald cleaning the snow off the window. putting a ratting canoe aboard for use as a lifeboat in case of emergency. John Kendi helping them cast off. And finally, Mrs. Kirk watching the departure. There they go. Hello, this is Jim Wake. Item 9, which follows, comprises some shots left out of items 2 to 7 inclusive. These comments were made in 1986. A quick view of the John Newcon family camp at Old Crow. This is John's daughter, Jessie Thomas, chopping wood. John Newcon is stirring some dog food. This is believed to be John's daughter-in-law and his grandchild. Note the baby's bonnet. Close-up of John having a smoke. John, his family, and a few others made their home most of the year at Whitestone, a small collection of log cabins about 250 miles or more farther up the Porcupine River. This is Winston Moses eating a piece of bannock. Mary Lazarus and her child observe the beaded baby strap. An air view of Fort Yukon, Alaska. This scene is believed to have been taken in August 1947 when I was departing for Whitehorse. A scene of the north side of Main Street, Whitehorse, in the downtown area. This scene and those which follow are thought to have been taken in 1947. A paddle wheel steamer tied up to the dock at Whitehorse, Yukon. The paddle wheel of the steamer Whitehorse under repair. I gratefully acknowledge that Mr. T.C. Richards of Whitehorse kindly loaned me the camera used to record the scenes in items 2 through 9 for the duration of my posting to Old Crow from June 1945 through August 1947. Hello, this is Jim Wake in December 1986.